We're going to have our presentation done remotely from the folks at Con Ed. I'm just letting people get in the room for 1 minute. So I'm going to turn it over to Ed Conway from Con Edison. He's the plant manager, 59th Street, also on the board of directors here at IDA. And he will handle the introductions on the Con Ed side. So you guys are plugged in. You could be heard throughout the conference room. And we have the laptop on your control. So over to you, Ed. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So we would prefer to be doing this in San Diego. We just got hit with Storm Nemo, which dumped anywhere from 18 to 36 inches of snow on us. So we would definitely rather be with you. So just a quick few words I'd like to start off with. First, I'd like to thank IDA, specifically Rob Thornton, Bob Manning, and Pat Davin for giving us this opportunity to share Hurricane Sandy preparedness, response, and recovery. I also like to congratulate the Con Ed men and women for their outstanding customer service and response to this unbelievable storm. Finally, I also like to thank my colleagues, especially Christina Ho, for all her efforts. And we're lucky enough, Sonal Shukla, our vice president, just stepped in, but she's just going to be an observer. So I'd like to introduce Christina. She's going to give you a little bit of a background on her career here at Con Ed.
Thanks, Ed. As Ed mentioned, my name is Christina Ho. I'm the manager for operations planning for SEAM operations. I coordinate with our system operations group, who operates the system, as well with the plant, and our distribution folks. We do fuels purchasing and also manage contracts for natural gas as well. My career at Con Edison, I've been here a little over 10 years, going anywhere from supervising distribution crews, installing metering stations, installing field piping, working in the generating plants, installing capital projects, and now finally I'm in the planning group working with everybody.
Mike Brown.
Hello, everybody. Mike Brown. I'm plant manager of the East River Complex. We supply about 55% of all the steam in Manhattan, and we also produce about almost 700 megawatts of power. My background is I was a New York Maritime graduate, shipped out in the Merchant Marines for several years. I did have a prior stint in Con Edison as a ops supervisor, worked up in Indian Point as a system engineer, and then I went on the outside world with the independent power producers and district heating for the next 19 years, from being a plant manager from CHP down to NYU to fully electric plants in the PSCG and the Brooklyn Navy Yard. So I have almost about 30 years of power plant experience, and I've been a plant manager since 1999.
Rob Boyle.
Good afternoon. Rob Boyle. I'm the general manager of steam distribution. Responsibilities for that department are basically everything from the generation walls to the street, right up to the customer's premises. I've been with the company since 1986. That's 26 years. Many positions in our construction departments within the company, contract management. We went through a big series of substations being built over the past 10 years, including a couple of tunnels. And in June of 2011, I joined Steam to acquire some operating experience, and I've had the pleasure of working through 2 hurricanes in that short tenure.
Gary Hugo. Gary Hugo, graduate also of Maritime College, state of New York. Started with Con Edison in 1978. Most of my experience and background is associated with power generation. Worked at Astoria Generating Station in Queens. Was up at Indian Point for 19 years, nuclear, and now I'm the plant manager of 74th Street Complex since 2008.
And I'm Ed Conway. I'm also a maritime graduate. I'd like to share with you that Mike Brown and I played ball together, and I did strike him out a few times. He will not admit that, but I just wanted to share that.
I was blindfolded at the time.
So I started my career in 1989. I had some prior Con Ed experience. I started out in our transportation and stores group, which gave me a good background on the company. I quickly moved to steam operations and had various positions in environmental engineering, operations, and maintenance. And then I became the general manager of steam distribution. I moved on and had positions in construction management, transmission operations. I was a deputy ombudsman for the company for 3 years, and now I'm currently back in steam as plant manager of West 59th Street Generating Station, and I got the pleasure to work with all the folks on this end of the call. So we're going to share our experience for Hurricane Sandy. We're going to be sharing the presentation specifically on specific experiences and where folks spent some of their time. So I'm on page 3 now. So that's kind of the overview. We're going to also get into some storm facts, storm preparedness, which was a key to us, we feel, our success, looking out several days in advance as the storm started to come up the coast. We'll share some of the significant impacts and the impact to the steam system, both the generating stations and the steam distribution system. And we're prepared to entertain some questions and talk about our hardening efforts. Our hardening efforts are, what are we going to do to prepare for the next major storm of this magnitude? And this team will be prepared to discuss, those efforts. And I guess for Pat and Bob, just before we get started, should we entertain questions at the end, or do you want to entertain questions along the way?
I think it might be best to take them at the end.
Okay.
Typically, we'd do this a little less formally, but with the technology involved, it'd probably be clean for you to just run through, and then we could relay the questions if you can't hear them from the audience. So, and when you have questions, if you frame them in a concise, brief way so that Pat or I could restate them, it should go smoothly.
That's excellent. So we'll continue on. Christina's going to take us through the next few slides.
Okay.
So just to give everyone an overview, Con Edison, as a company, we provide 3 commodities to the New York City and Westchester area. We provide electricity to the southern 2/3 of Westchester County to the north and all of New York City except for the Rockaway Peninsula. We provide natural gas to the Bronx, Manhattan, and portions of Queens, as well as the majority of Westchester County. And last, if not most important, is our district energy steam system, which is located in Manhattan and runs from the southern tip of Manhattan to 96th Street on the west side and 89th Street on the east side. Steam has approximately 1,700 customers, a little more than that. We have over 100 miles of steam mains running throughout Manhattan, and we supply steam at an average pressure of guaranteed of 125 pounds gauge. So that gives you an idea of what Con Edison does, and just a little bit of basics about district energy in Manhattan. It's a large system. It spans quite a wide expanse through Manhattan, and some of those areas of steam mains are located in, obviously, in areas on the extremities of the island. And as you can see from this image, there's quite a bit of water surrounding us from all sides that has the potential to impact us at varying flood levels. So before I get to the flood-prone areas, just to give you an idea of our generating capacities, this table summarizes our stations. So we have the 59th Street station with a capacity of just under 1,400 M-pounds per hour, which is about 12% of our system. 60th Street station, which is part of the 74th Street complex, 720 M-pounds per hour at about 6%. 74th Street station at around 2,000 M-pounds per hour. That's about 17% of our system. The Brooklyn Navy Yard at 920 M-pounds per hour, about 8%. East River Station at a little over 5,800 M-pounds per hour, coming in just over 50% of the system. And Ravenswood Generating Station at 750, which is about 6% of the system. In total, we have 11,600 M-pounds per hour capacity of generation. And this is going to become important later when we show you what the impact was to our system and what we took out of service preemptively, as well as what was impacted by far greater than predicted flood levels in our generating stations. So I mentioned that some of the areas where our steam mains lie are also in flood-prone areas. Now this is an older version. The city will be coming out with new flood zones, but prior to the storm, if you can see the shaded areas or the evacuation zone areas for New York City, these correlate to flood zones. And these flood zones are obviously potentially more impacted in the orange area, less so in the yellow area, and even less so in the green area. Those are the higher and higher elevation areas going inwards towards the center of Manhattan. As you can see from the different zones, these zones are allocated based on the type of potential flooding, based on the level of a hurricane or flood level in the city. The city had actually taken evacuation methods prior to the impact of the storm. They began to evacuate and actually shut down transportation on the Sunday night prior to the storm. They evacuated folks in the Zone A areas and some as well in the Zone B. In terms of ourselves, Con Edison took some preemptive actions in these flood zones that we'll talk about more in detail shortly. So right now I'm going to hand it over to Rob Boyle to talk about some of the actions that we took in the street, and then Mike will talk about the actions that we had in some of the plants.
All right, so as per the Con Edison corporate procedure, we begin talks 120 hours in advance of any potential storm that may hit the area. In fact, I remember, I think it was the Thursday before that, we were actually on a conference call with some folks from Veolia up in Massachusetts and also down in Philadelphia. And at that time, we knew it was coming, but we didn't know where it was going to hit, and everybody was kind of scrambling to develop their own plans. So we start discussing those plans in advance, but as it looks like the track is going to be heading into us, we start taking the necessary precautions that are identified in our coastal storm plan. Fortunately, we had a good experience the year before with Hurricane Irene, where we had to enact our coastal storm plan, so we were able to go through it and use the lessons learned from Irene as part of this preparation. That includes moving into our ICS structure, incident command structure, with personnel from our operations and engineering and customer relations, as well as any other support groups that are going to be required. We start setting up 12-hour shifts on a 24/7 basis. We identify the systems in the flood-prone area that could be impacted by the type of storm that we're expecting. At this point, the initial storm that was going to come was rated as a Category 1, so we started initiating actions to isolate the generation plants and the distribution mains in these areas. We also want to notify customers in advance, businesses of the impacted areas, to advise them in advance of our intentions to isolate them. Our operations for the distribution department is on 16th Street, right off the East River. It's located in a Category 1 zone. So we have a plan to relocate our operations to a New York City Park area, which is out of the flood zone. The problem we experienced was, as Christina said, the city started their notification process and evacuation on Sunday night, and we were trying to get into a lot of these areas well in advance of that. So we were getting a little resistance from New York City at first that they thought this wouldn't be as bad as it actually was. So we didn't really move into our relocated area until Sunday morning. which is about 36 hours before the storm actually hit. So we moved all our vehicles from that yard, all our equipment to the temporary yard. We also have to relocate our dispatchers and our operation support staff from 16th Street as well. They went over to our headquarters at 4 of them place, and we set up shop over there so they'd be able to monitor the system during the storm. And finally, we lined up all of our support operations because what we were expecting from the storm was heavy rains and expected winds, and that we'd still have to deal with a lot of these elements during the storm. So we were lining up all of our contractors as well as our other support organizations during this period of time.
How you doing? It's Mike Brown. I'm going to give the perspective of being at the generating plant. The plant was physically located smack dab in the middle of Zone A, which is the most flood-prone zone in Manhattan. And we had to do the same thing, 120 hours out. We had plans in place to go after all the flood-prone areas in the plant, and we shored them up with sandbags, floodgates. We also strategically shut down all the plants at East River. You have several units. You have 6 units, 7 units, 10 and 20 units, and you have South Steam Station. All of them were secured before the impact of the storm. Actually, we were secured 24 hours before the storm hit. Another strategy that was in place also at the plant was to strategically have the right amount of people on site, because if the surge came in as bad as it did, you're going to have people that were going to have problems getting in the next morning, and people are going to be stranded through the night. So we had to strategically pull people off and make sure that we had folks coming in to cover on the day shift. Quick strategy of the plant and the assets was as follows. East River, because it was completely in Zone A, we were to secure that and associated distribution piping. 59th Street, 60th Street, 74th Street, and Ravenswood A were much higher elevation, and the game plan was for those assets to support the steam system that was still piped in service. What we didn't expect was to have over 3 feet higher surge in the greatest surge in like 200 years. And flooding affected 59th Street plant and 74th Street plant. The only 2 plants that supported through the storm were 60th Street and Ravenswood A. It was quite an amazing run, but we kept the system pressurized throughout the night.
On page 8, we have just a little timeline that kind of takes us from the 120 hours out right up to the storm. So as you mentioned in advance, we're looking at the system. We're closing up as many jobs as possible, paving a lot of our open excavations, protecting equipment, recalling equipment. By Friday, we began contacting our customers and advising them in the Category 1 flood zone that we would be taking them out of service over the weekend. We tried to make it so that it would be at the last moment possible, so we weren't taking them out for the whole weekend. So these actually were scheduled to start on Sunday morning. On Saturday, we got weather updates from our weather service that told us that the storm surges were probably going to be greater than what was originally expected, and that this would be a Category 2 flood zone now. So we initiated the additional isolations in those areas. In total, we had 26 main shutoffs that had to be performed prior to the storm, and this affected 130 customers. It's about 15 miles of our distribution main and services. They were all completed by Monday morning, which is about 12 hours before the storm. As Mike said, the Navy Yard and the East River stations were brought offline because these are both in the Category 1 area. And we had already identified locations for our employees because we expected that they'd have to ride out the storm. We had hotel arrangements within Manhattan. The plants had sleeping arrangements also set up. So we're basically walking into Monday knowing that a storm's coming. And we actually started having a lot of meetings on restoration efforts at that point, because we knew the storm would come. It would probably be 6 to 12 hours, and then immediately we were looking to get everybody back in service again. As the night approached, we also were getting information that our electric system would also be impacted, because they were also going to be impacted in the Category 1 zone. So we knew that this was going to have an impact on the steam system as well if the electric networks were going to get disturbed. So walking into this, it's Monday now. The high tide that night is expected to be at 9 o'clock in the evening. And just to give you kind of what's happening, 4 o'clock, we start getting heavy winds in the area. We have a construction crane on 57th Street, which is right in Midtown, high rise, probably 60 stories. We get notification that that's collapsed and hanging over parts of Manhattan, so we know that this is going to be a serious storm. We had to go out and isolate that section of Maine and shut down around 12 customers. And we also started getting flooding on the FDR Drive right around the United Nations. This is about 6 o'clock, so this is 3-4 hours before the high tide arrived. And we did not expect this to be happening, so we just kind of knew that it was going to be some unique storm.
Just to give you a sense of the numbers when we're talking about the tidal surge, when we're talking about all of the predictions for what the tidal surge would be, we reference it to the Battery, which is the southern tip of Manhattan. The initial predictions had been that the surge would go to maybe 11 and a half feet at high tide. On the extremities or on the high side, the extremes of the forecast called for high tide of a maximum of approximately 12 feet. So it was getting closer and closer to 12 feet in the forecast every hour that we inch closer to that high tide. So I just want you to keep that number, that 12-foot maximum in mind when we talk about what actually transpired through that evening.
So and also Rob had mentioned our ICS structure, which is our incident command structure. We entered what we call a CERC, which is a corporate emergency response. We actually open up a center where all our operating organizations and support organizations group up, and all communications, both for support and information, go from the local area. So Christina was one of the people that ran the steam desk, and every 4 hours we would have a call with this team communicating things like what's the forecast, what's the tides, do you need sandbags, what support do you need, and back and forth, and what are the actions of the other stations in steam distribution. So we kind of lived this together for a several-day period. So I just wanted to add that.
One other thing was, in our coastal storm plan that we have, there were actually 2 other areas that we had identified to be isolated. One of them was a tunnel from our Ravenswood plant into Manhattan, because it's potentially susceptible to flooding. Within our plan, we developed the paperwork to proceed with it, but we said we'll put it on hold and only implement it if we need to. And another one was some of the outlet mains at our 60th Street plant, which was in another potential flood area if there was flood maps. And we said we'd take the same approach, that we pull the trigger if we needed to do it only when we saw that it was being flooded. By not doing those, we were able to keep the steam system going. So although you have flood maps and although you have plans, every storm is different. We got major flooding on the east side of Manhattan on this storm. There were parts of the west side of Manhattan that really didn't get that much. So you really got to, you can prepare in advance for these, but some of these things are really game time decisions that need to be made.
That's an important point to bring up, is that the entire process was a bit iterative. every few hours when we'd regroup, we'd make a decision on what the next step should be. And at every time, our mindset was, let's make as many contingency plans as we can conceivably make with the available resources, but how do we retain the system in as best a configuration as possible to retain our customers online as long as possible, but still have in place the plans we need if we do have to take an action closer to impact time. And that's what our goal was the whole time, was make sure that we have some sort of plan in place and the resources allocated and staged in a safe location that they can get where they need to be. And a lot of that played into our decision making as to how to isolate the system later, how to retain portions of the system as we went. And we were, as Rob says, a couple of different decisions, and we may have been at zero pressure following the storm. So just to take you into, this is all of our preparation. Here we are. We've sandbagged ourselves in. We've got folks throughout the stations and in distribution staged with trucks at ready locations in case we need to drop portions of the system. We're watching the tides come in. It's about 8 or 8:30 at night, and the surge just keeps coming, and it just keeps coming, and it just keeps coming. So let's talk about what actually transpired with this storm, right? Let's talk about some statistics. We're calling this a superstorm for a reason. Superstorm Sandy wasn't just one storm. It was a combination of multiple front systems that when weather folks talk about it, it literally is a perfect alignment of conditions that allowed these two storm systems to merge and settle and just sit right over top of the New Jersey, New York, New England coastline. At its widest, it spanned nearly 1,000 miles. It was the largest Atlantic storm on record. We had sustained winds of 64 miles an hour at LaGuardia Airport. That is very significant. There were peak gusts of 90 miles an hour on Staten Island. Who would have ever thought that? And remember, I mentioned what the forecast had been for the storm tide or the storm surge. They had been predicting at a maximum that we would hit 12 feet, and that was the highest that we'd seen, maybe just a hair over. The actual storm surge hit a little over 14 feet. That's in excess of 2 feet greater than what was anticipated. And this is significant because a storm surge of this magnitude overcame restraint barriers in our plants. It overcame the restraint barriers in a number of locations. There was a significant impact all over Manhattan. And just so everyone's aware, this topped the historic record in Manhattan by nearly 3 feet. So let's talk about the impacts just in general. Let's back up and look at Manhattan as a whole. There were 11 electrical networks impacted as a result of the storm in Lower Manhattan. It took out everything below about 42nd Street. Tunnels were flooded. There was debris all over the harbor. It was floating up into the streets, and we'll show you that in a minute. One of the most significant impacts for transportation for the city was the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, which connects Lower Manhattan into Brooklyn. It was completely submerged. Millions of gallons of water flooded this tunnel, and it stayed that way for quite some time. In fact, it was weeks before this tunnel was reopened to public use. From our perspective, from a steam perspective, the impact to the electrical networks Rob mentioned in Lower Manhattan was significant to us because the effect of loss of power on our customers, there's a potential for loss of condensate pumps. So that was a concern to us as well, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But let's look at just some more general photos of how the city was impacted. The battery tunnel is in Lower Manhattan. This is primarily where the main flood areas were, if you noticed from the flood maps earlier. Here you could see just water gushing and pouring into the tunnel entrance. This Battery Park underpass is a method to traverse from one side of the island down there to the other. That was completely flooded out. Unless you had a scuba, you weren't going in there.
Can I just chime in?
Go ahead.
Yes, so with all this devastation, we also had to be very sensitive and work with our employees. There was restrictions getting in and out of Manhattan. Gasoline was a big issue. So our folks who went home at night, they had a battle with either having somebody at home get gas, 5-gallon gas cans, whatever it may be, or wait on gas lines to get back to work. So, you know, you see all this devastation, the impact to our employees, and then a lot of our employees had damage at the homes themselves, struggling with phone calls, contractors, tree removal services. So at every level, this impacted everything that we do and what we would consider normal. So I just wanted to chime in about the impact to our employees as well.
Thanks, Ed. And so now we want to focus in more on steam in specific, right? That was kind of a general impact to the area, to the region. We didn't even touch upon, you know, the devastation in the shore of New Jersey. There was significant impact to Manhattan, which is where we're primarily focused because the steam system is only in Manhattan, but there was devastation in Staten Island, in southern Queens, in Long Island. There were areas that were literally destroyed. And if some of you have seen the CNN or any of the news media outlets, you've seen photos of just homes decimated. But let's move in. So closer into the steam system, our impact primarily was in terms of shutdowns and isolations and return time, and cleaning off equipment that was impacted by the flooding. So if you take a look at here's our handy little chart again showing our system capacities. So as we mentioned earlier, we had shut down a portion of our system, and you know, when you think about it in terms of numbers of complexes, it doesn't seem like an awful lot. But if you look at what we actually did, we actually took out some of our most major players, right? So we took out nearly 60% of the system, shutting down preemptively. So that was unavailable to us. Because of the storm surge, that surge that went to 14 feet, we were inundated in our plants, and our operators were diligent. They were watching the floods, they were watching the inches creep up, and they had to make decisions about what they needed to take offline safely, and that's what we did. So in addition to that 60% of our system that we took out of service, we also took both 74th Street and 59th Street out of service. Now, if you look at that, you see what's left. We were down to just nearly 1,500 M-pounds on our system available capacity. This equates to maybe only 11 to 12% of our system. We had nearly 90% of our generating capacity out of commission, unavailable. We had, again, the 11 networks out of service. There was no power to Lower Manhattan. We're operating in the dark. We were working in our corporate emergency center in the headquarters. We had diesel backup power, so we were able to continue operations from a central location, but a lot of folks needed to regroup, assess, and put together a plan to move forward from there. In all, we also took measures to isolate a much larger portion of Lower Manhattan. And by the end of the day into the next, as we were recovering out of the impacts of the storm and assessing the system, we had 561 steam services affected and isolated as a result of this storm.
As the 74th Street plant and the 59th Street plant were losing their generation ability the night of the storm, we had plans in place with crews manned at certain valves to drop additional sections of the distribution system. And that call came right about the time that we started to lose electric power also in these networks. So it was all kind of happening at the same time. The plants were coming offline, the electric networks were starting to get shut down. So we had two valves, one on the east side of Manhattan, one on the west side of Manhattan. They ended up getting closed, and that basically dropped all of our steam systems south of 14th Street. And that was done to maintain the pressures as they were severely dropping right at this time. So we were able to maintain them at a much lower pressure, but we were able to ride out the night by dropping that additional section.
And just to add a little bit to the sense of impact across the region, not only was this a significant impact to us, but the harbor itself was closed. And this kind of speaks to why fuel was so unavailable, that we couldn't move barges around in the harbor, that the harbor was closed for nearly 3 days. There was debris floating everywhere, and the Coast Guard did not feel it was safe to move and navigate vessels through the waterways. In fact, at one point, because we became nearly desperate, we were considering having a Coast Guard escort for one of our fuel barges to bring it in so that we could move fuel around at a much slower pace, but to try and keep some of our remaining generating units online. And this is a couple of days after the storm that we're still looking for ways to get logistics and materials and resources into the area.
We were actually managing Caro deliveries because shortly after we started to restore, because of the impact to electric, a lot of the stations we had to run our gas turbines. So we were on the phone with, like I mentioned, the corporate emergency response with Christina, and we were managing tanker by tanker which station they were going to go to next. So it was kind of interesting.
And so what I'm going to do now is, I'm going to hand it to Mike. Mike is going to do a little intro, and then Mike will let you folks know when we're ready for the video.
Okay.
Hi, how you doing? The picture you see right now is of a utility truck distribution, and that is actually about 3 blocks, city blocks away from the river. You have almost 5 feet of water right there. And living through it, I wouldn't have believed it if I didn't see it, but I couldn't believe how fast the water came in. We had approximately 3.5 feet of water in our basement, in our main lobby. We had evacuated our security folks in the lobby, and we brought them up to the 5th floor, and about 15 minutes later we ran downstairs, and you had a foot of water that generated in that 15 minutes inside the lobby. And then it was just a race from how quickly that this surge was rising, and everything started around 6 or 7 o'clock at night, and peaked out around 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And by 1 in the morning, the water was gone. That's how fast it came in and went out. So I'm going to segue into the video.
The highest flooding ever recorded in New York was 1821. and it was like 11.2 feet. We went to 14 foot.
The surge. This was the recorded surge that night, Monday night.
So when the floods came in, we didn't have lighting, we didn't have sewage, we didn't have water, we didn't have heat. We're completely black. First thing we did was reestablish lighting so we could see what the damage was internally. And our plant was designed for the worst case scenario. Most things are designed, most plants are designed to have a 100-year flood. We were completely encircled by about 5 feet of water out in 14th Street. And I was looking outside the window and watching this occur right in front of my eyes not too long after we lost all our power. We're not paid to get scared. We're paid to react. So got in touch with Steam Ops OEM, Rich Iacco. I said, I got a gate for you to get the troops in here. I called them up, and then we went to the Avenue D gate, and folks started coming in from electric ops, substations, steam ops. And right after that, we were on battery power for all auxiliary lighting, emergency lighting. See the water level? This actually started showing up as white and corroding like a day or two after the water receded. Now salt water just goes to town on it. See all the damage that happened? That's 13.8 kV, stepped down to 2400 volts, and it blew this whole compartment apart. You were up to your chest, you know, shoulders in water here. And all you needed was establish ground, you know, establish a circuit, and away you go. We had plywood here. It blew the plywood through, came in here, and knocked this flat on its back. It blew it right over. And you see how it pulled all the conduit? This is all metal conduit. Water was up over here. That's how high up it was. And we were designed, our 100-year flood design was down here. And the waters were coming over this capstan. We had about 70 people in the plant, and thank God we had those 70 people in the plant because they de-energized the whole plant to avoid a situation where we could have had further damage. So we got one unit in Sunday night, second unit went in Monday night from Tuesday morning. On unit East River 10, 180 megawatts, and East River 20, 180 megawatts. Number one, the goal is now we have the assets that we can supply our customers. Now we're turning on customers. So once that happens, we can increase our load to support our customers. Okay? And we still have two other units that can supply steam. We're in the process right now of getting those assets back, Unit 6 and Unit 7. So we'll be ready for the winter load. We will make it.
So as you can see, the pictures, the stills you see on slide 15, that was the morning. That was the morning high tide. Obviously, it was definitely not what we saw later that night. But as you can see, it was kicking up pretty well, and it was actually into the street and about a block into the street in the morning alone. And the extent of the flooding went for about 4 city blocks into Manhattan from where we were. The FDR Drive, which is the easternmost drive along the river, was part of the river. And there were sections, like I said, about 5 to 5.5 feet surrounding the entire plant. And the winds were such where it was driving pretty much all the piers from the Brooklyn side across due east to west over onto our pier. We had to get about almost 20 laborers working around the clock for about 3.5 days just to clear this whole area on the dock that you see right now. You couldn't walk on that dock when during the aftermath of the storm.
Okay. So just to add a little bit more, this is 59th Street. This is looking down from an upper elevation down into our part of our Demin plant. And as you can see, the picture on the left is during the flooding, and the picture on the right is afterwards. And basically, you're looking at about 4 feet of water in the basement. Some of the key challenges became a lot of our motors in the station became inundated with salt water. So replacing and doing mega tests and drying them out to make sure that they were able to go into service became a critical piece. As Mike mentioned, a lot of the preparation. So also about 3 or 4 hours, the storm started hitting about 7 p.m., 8 p.m. The amount of water that came in, and we had contingency plans to isolate transformers and feeders and lighting panels. That all occurred during like a 3-hour period. So you can imagine during a 2 or 3 hour period that you had no water in the basement, as you see on the right, and all of a sudden you had major pieces of equipment underwater. And as Christina mentioned, the key number was about 12 feet of surge tide. We got 14 feet, which went over our design basis of the 12 feet, which meant critical equipment like fuel oil pumps, those motors became inundated because the water went 2 feet above the moats that we had in our basements. Feed pumps, same thing, were inundated with water. So just a tremendous impact, and I don't know if this is interesting to anybody, but we actually saw fish swimming in that area that's shown on the picture. So on the next slide, slide 17 at 59th Street, we most of our units or most of our fuel is oil. We have 2 barges that are out on a pier, what we call Pier 98. So Pier 98, that's a picture of Pier 98, and basically the challenge was how are we going to safely secure one of our barges with 1 million gallons of fuel against the pier. We contacted a tug company, which we have contracts with, brought in 2 tugs, and pretty much pinned that barge up against the pier. And the good news was, it was fully loaded, so it didn't go over the pier. So we thought that was a very good strategy, and we developed that, in preparation for the storm. The other critical pieces of information is the Coast Guard requires that we disconnect our cargo hoses from the barge to the pier that goes into the station when we get sustained winds above 50 miles an hour. So the other things we were concerned about, we were hoping that we wouldn't lose the station, but there was periods of time where we were managing fuel because we had to disconnect those cargo hoses and wait for the winds to go down. The other just point of information, if you look to the right, you'll see in the closer in the picture where the big pipes are, there's a little shack there. The water at its height was almost up to the top of those windows. And, without a pointer, I'm just trying to give you a reference point on what it looked like out there. And to the left, you can see all the debris. So there's just some points of information for the 59th Street station. Gary.
So this is a picture of 74th Street high pressure basement. As Rob said, we initially stayed on as a facility, but were forced off. What looks like a yellow line in front of our equipment there is actually a 3.5-foot flood wall, and the water at this moment in time is about 4 inches below that. And so the wall is doing what it's designed to do to protect critical equipment, and any leakage that goes inside the wall then gets pumped back to, I'll call it the water side.
This just gives you a sense that when the flood protection is protecting you against the flood that's below your flood protection level, it works very well. And this storm more than exceeded our flood protection levels significantly. So our preparation is good, but this storm really really brought us some scenarios that we had never seen before.
So we actually went a foot and a half above that flood wall. This is a picture of another one of our facilities that stayed in service. Ravenswood Station is located in Queens and then sends steam across a tunnel to the Manhattan system. This is actually showing a service water pump that provides water to the aerators, that feeds the boiler feed pumps, that feed the boilers. This plant is all steam-driven auxiliaries. We had one pump to keep the system in service here, and we made an operational decision to continue to operate that steam-driven pump, even though it was compromised with the flood level, because the bearings in both the governor, in the pump, in the motor, and then the governor oil was all compromised. We had to actually keep a water supply to keep the pump fully submerged as a cooling mechanism. And this is one of the two plants that stayed in service in a very obviously limited condition.
And folks, if you're ready on that end, I think we have a little video just to show you this pump in operation. We had about 12% of capacity on the system. To move on to just give you a sense of the amount of equipment or the sheer numbers, we had backup power systems, several compressed air systems, many breakers and transformers, valves, instrument panels, and over 300 pumps and motors that had to be removed, cleaned, baked, tested, and returned to service. And we were able to do this and get a majority of our system back within a number of days. And now I'm going to turn it over to Rob to talk about the street perspective and some of the impacts in the field.
So the next morning we start thinking about restoration efforts. There's a lot of issues to deal with outside the streets of Manhattan. One of the big differences between this storm and Irene that we had in August of 2011, Irene, we ended up getting 7 inches of rain in a 24-hour period. Sandy, believe it or not, we had less than a half an inch of rain. That was good, so we didn't have to chase a lot of flooding issues in non-flood-prone areas during the storm. But we had tremendous winds and flooding, and some of the pictures you see there, I talked about the crane collapse. That's the crane that was dangling over Midtown. Debris, that's the FDR Drive. You can see the UN in the background. Just major thoroughfares were closed. Building facades had come down. Street lights, we're not an overhead area in Manhattan. There's a lot of overhead damages in some of our other operating areas, but everything is pretty much underground, but we had a lot of obstacles to get around. We had flooding in streets and our structures and customer locations. Of course, no lights, so a lot of the work we were doing for the first 3-4 days were done in daylight, and no traffic lights in Manhattan, so if you can imagine what it was like trying to get around sections of Manhattan with no traffic lights, it was chaos. Weather, it was late October, but it was cold, and a few days into this, we actually had a nor'easter come through the area and hit us with some snow and some real cold weather, which just further hampered our restoration efforts. Page 22, just to, again, the Corporate Emergency Response Center, that was our lifeline. We would go there for information, report our results. We were getting a lot of updates on what was happening with the electric, gas, and steam systems, weather updates on how it was going to affect the system restoration, materials, equipment, contracted services, conference calls every 4 hours, and plans changed every 3 hours. So it was just a continual change dealing with all of the obstacles that continue to come our way. Just to recap the customers, we had isolated all of our customers in the Category 1 and 2 flood zones. That impacted 130 customers. When we lost the 2 additional plants, we dropped another 15 miles of main below 14th Street, and that impacted another 236 customers. So now we have about 30 miles of mains in our distribution system, just about a third of the system been isolated. The electric power was lost in 11 networks below 42nd Street, so although we had steam in certain areas, there was no electric. We had to isolate those customers because of fear that they wouldn't have pumps that would be operating, and that was another 142 that were impacted. Finally, as the weather got colder, we had to curtail some of our largest customers in north of 42nd Street, and that was another 53 customers, just so we can keep the rest of the system running during those days. So that's the total 561 customers that were impacted. We set out to prioritize how we're going to restore our services and mains, set up all our support from our construction services, which is a labor crew within our Con Edison, but really provides a lot of our pumping support. We needed our engineers to restore the mains. Gas wasn't impacted on this storm, so we did get resources from our gas operations group, and we had a multitude of contractor support. Restoring the system. We had, as I said, almost 1,000 structures in that area that had become flooded, and we had to set up a plan to sequentially restore these 30 miles of mains. So although we had enacted 14 MSOs to shut down, the first 2 plans, with all of these additional outages we had to do, we had to come up with a plan on how we're going to bring these 30 miles of mains back. And it involved going to every one of the structures, inspecting them to see if there's any damages, pumping out the structures, cold draining the mains with condensate, repumping the structures again, and then getting the okay from our energy dispatcher to start introducing steam back into the system. We prioritized the mains based on which stations were going to come back, so we had send-out mains available that would align with our generation returns. We had certain transmission mains on the east side and west side of Manhattan that had to be brought back. We also looked at which mains would bring back the largest number of customers. The critical customers, we had some hospitals that were impacted, which were the most impacted areas where flooding occurred and would probably take the longest time to return. And also we had to continue to look at our system pressures. So as we brought mains back and restored customers, we had to make sure we had the generation supply that was there, so we didn't create a condition where we were creating low pressure again by bringing more customers back on. Once the mains were energized, we then could use our steam distribution services crews to start restoring customers. This was a big effort. A lot of customer locations had experienced some damages, and a lot of them had evacuated, so trying to get everyone back so we can start bringing services back was a big effort.
It's just to add to what Rob said about the generation. So, you know, we wanted to make sure that we could bring whatever units we could bring back as quickly as possible. And just to give you some examples, at 74th Street, within 48 hours at 74th Street, we brought back their 6 package boilers, and at 59th Street we brought back 5 boilers. And the strategy there was, in the pre-planning and preparation, we brought in diesel dewatering units that were used during the storm, and then they just became inundated. And at 59th Street, we had pretty much finished dewatering the plant by 6 a.m. that following morning. So that's another key strategy that led us to successfully bring back customers.
And a lot of the crews that we got supporting us in the pumping operations, the electric service was restored a good part of it in Manhattan by that Friday. So we were able to then start getting some of the crews that were supporting the electric groups to come over and start supporting steam as we were getting ready with our plant. On page slide 24, it just gives you a little pictorial of the timeline and our system generation. So the blue bars are our customer outages, and they started when we started isolating customers on the 28th, and you can see they peaked right during the storm, actually the following day when we isolated the additional customers, so they peaked at 561. And the red line signifies the percentage of generation that we had available. You see the dramatic drop leading into the storm, and then a gradual increase as we got to November 4th. One of the plans we had from that period, from the 29th to the 4th, was we had set up an intermediate pressure zone across 42nd Street, Manhattan. So what we had to do was we shut every one of the valves feeding the southern part of Manhattan and opened up the bypasses. And then each day we'd have crews positioned on those valves during the morning loads just to see what kind of loads were developing. And we would actually be ready to shut the system down south of 42nd Street if we saw that the pressures were dropping. And there were a couple of days where pressures got very low and we were almost ready to shut another section of Manhattan down. The big part that we were waiting for was the return of East River, and the schedule was for November 5th, and we had a contingency plan in place that the weather had update there was that the cold weather was coming, and if East River didn't come back online on the 5th, we had another plan in place where we were going to have to drop around 250 customers right around the Times Square area. So on the morning of the 5th, we were either going to start restoring customers if East River came back online, or we were going to drop another 250 customers, major hotels and businesses in our Times Square area. And around 3 o'clock in the morning, it came on, and we were into full-fledged mode of restoring customers at that point. And that's where you see the decline in the blue bar, and then finally East River 2 came back on the 7th, which provided enough supply to restore all of our customers. We had targeted a date of 11/11 for a return of all our customers. We actually beat it by a day. All of the customers that were ready to receive steam were restored by November 10th. There were 49 customers that were not ready to receive steam because of the significant damage that they that incurred inside their premises, and we're still working on restoring a handful of those customers at this time. The communications plan is very important with our customers. I'm sure you've heard a lot about what's happened in New York and the responses of keeping our customers informed. I do take pride in steam. We were at the forefront advising them in advance of when they would be isolated. So by Friday, we were giving them letters, emails, voice response units, sending out messages, advising them when they would be isolated, and an expected return. As we got updates on the systems and the weather and the return of our plants, we were able to give a little more refined data on when certain customers would be able to be restored based on the return of the main that they're being fed off. Updates were continually sent out to customers. Hundreds of phone calls would come in each day. Christina handled a number of those in our CERC office, and I won't say it was perfect in the first few days, but by the end it worked out a good system where if somebody called up she could call down to the operations group, get a pretty good answer of when we expected them to be returning, and get that answer back to either the municipal agency or the customer. So there's some lessons to be learned in communication, and we're going to work on that in the future. Now I have just a video. This is the good part of the job. This is two of our mechanics, Carl Burrell and Ronzi Broxton, and this is the end part of when a customer finally gets their service back on.
Well, I'm here to turn on the steam to the service to the building. Yeah. So I have to be downstairs while my partner upstairs turn on the valve, and I'll monitor the steam pressure that's downstairs. And I'll let them know how much turns to give me. Yeah, they're gonna be happy, all right? They're gonna have heat, hot water. The pumps are running, right? You got electric on your pumps?
Yeah.
All right.
The pumps right here. I mean, they don't run
Until right. All right. But what we're gonna do? We're gonna turn on up to your house valve, okay?
Okay.
Dry. Okay, Braxton.
There you go. There you go.
Crack the valve.
Move it on.
Nothing yet, Braxton. Go ahead, give me a little more.
He'll be there in a sec. He's was on the phone.
Another happy customer.
Thank you very much to Con Ed. Give me some heat, some steam.
See you, man.
All right, later.
So it's a hotel, so now they're very happy, you know. They could take their showers. And now they'll have business, more business. It's very good. I'm happy for them.
We're just gonna move on to the next location and do the same thing all over again.
Okay, so you heard about us being impacted by the storm, you know, preparing for the storm, being impacted in our response and our parallel efforts to get things back as quickly as possible. One of the things that we just wanted to touch upon briefly was impact to our steam business from climate change. Obviously, the fact that we had two storms in two sequential years, one far exceeding the previous one, which was historic in its own right. What does climate change mean for us? And we've worked with our weather folks, and I think everyone would agree that it's very difficult to assess where this takes us because the deltas in what you could forecast could be so extreme. But what we do see generally happening is higher seasonal average temperatures resulting in changing profiles for heating demand. So we might see more extremes in the peak needs, but we might see a lower overall general demand for heating. We might see increased frequency and severity of storm events. So events like this could potentially be more frequent. And that just means that we need to be even more forward-thinking and considering what our next steps are. And then rising sea level, obviously, for those of us located along coasts or adjacent to major waterways, the rising sea level has a potential for greater and frequency and regularity of flooding of our infrastructure. So these are all things that, while we can't put a pin in exactly where the trajectory is for any of these, we know that the sense is that extremes will become more frequent, and our emergency and response planning needs to be flexible and able to respond to those types of scenarios.
Another example of extremes, if you look at the last 50 years in our area about tornadoes, we've had more tornadoes in the last 10 years than we had in all the last 40 years prior. So we definitely are seeing a change in the severity of storms of all types.
And just to give you a sense of the financial impact for steam operations alone, and this isn't even counting the rest of our commodities at Con Edison, the full all-in impact of restoration from the storm for steam operations has been estimated at $35 million, and that's just to put us back to where we were before the storm hit us. In going forward from this, we're proposing around $165 million for storm hardening, and that involves sealing intake and discharge tunnels, compartmentalizing facilities, raising and installing moats, relocating equipment out of the newer historic floodplain areas, and installing submersible flood pumps. And so the next few slides just kind of give you a visual of some of our more immediate measures that will be implemented more quickly than others, including sealing the lower portions of facades. So this slide gives you an idea of how we might forecast sealing the perimeter around our facilities. Another example of intermediate measures are installing floodgates at some of our entranceways, and this is a system that should be relatively simple to install and provide some additional protection so that we could place sandbags additionally internally to keep the floodwaters out. If you look internally, again, we mentioned the moat walls, increasing the head space on these or increasing the walls can also provide some additional flood protection that we should be able to implement in a reasonably quick time frame to get us in a better zone. Additionally, adding flood protection moats where there has not been any need before. So we're looking at all of our facilities to include these items. And this sluice gate gives you an idea of what we could do for the facilities where they have intake and discharge tunnels, either from existing or historic power generating cooling water intake systems. These types of options are some of our very immediate in the near few months and into the next couple of years options for plans for storm hardening for our facilities. And to just summarize our concepts, evacuation and system de-energizing plans, no matter how we revise them, need to be practical and safe, no matter what type of flood protection levels we're considering. We need to be in concert with whatever is proposed by the city and the state for local area flood protection. So while we have our own concepts of what we think are near-term solutions, there are probably also going to be more widespread requirements that may cause us to take different measures than we've already taken. So we're looking to see what those are so we can finalize plans for anything beyond the immediate items that we think we can do to protect our equipment internally. And then obviously with any measure that you project and install, you got to consider the environmental health and safety aspects of it. You know, are you building a moat wall that now encompasses your entire basement, and now you've created a space that maybe you need different ventilation for? So there's many aspects of this that need to be assessed to move further and further down the road, depending on what targets we set for our hardening goals. And just to kind of wrap it up towards the end as we go towards questions, we just wanted to give you a sense of the magnitude of the logistical issues and lengths we went to get resources for our entire company. While STEAM was able to work with the resources we had internally, electric needed resources from all over, and there were resources allocated all up and down the eastern seaboard. This is actually a military transport plane that brought bucket trucks from California to New York to assist us in supporting the restoration efforts from a company-wide perspective. And we just thought that was a neat thing to share with you, that as we were coordinating on a corporate level, we assessed all of our needs and then moved from there to define what resources we needed to get us to the end game.